All right, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net. We're going to do a pitch analysis here, Matt. We're going to pair them up with Cody Hall, take them both out of their leg lifts. Okay, you can see pretty quickly coming out of leg lift, Matt, you're collapsing. Well, we would call this collapsing your back leg. You're going into a valgus position by pushing your knee inside your hip. You can see as when Cody comes out in that position, you can see he's sitting more into this back hip, so there's more counter rotation of the hip, more hip flexion. And then more external rotation. So he's when you put external rotation in your femur, where that knee's slightly turning out, it creates more stability there, and that's why he's able to sit into that hip and ride it better. You can see with you now that your back knee is going down, you're already starting to shift your weight forward. You're already starting to reach to your front side. Your glove is reaching out, so everything's wanting to transfer at this point. So Cody stays back there even through his drive, which is pretty impressive, to be able to extend and push off the rubber as your shoulders are even, staying counter-rotated and closed. You can see that the chin is well over the back hip. You can see at the point where you're starting to come off the rubber, your chin's more over your belt buckle at this point. And then when you hit front foot strike, you can see your chin then pushes out in front of your hips. When you take Cody to front foot strike, he's still in line with his hips as he's extending through. And you can see as the arm cocks, you see the trunk is still separated and closed off from the hips. And that's what we see in a lot of studies where the elite pitchers have the more closed shoulder orientation at front foot strike. You're at front foot strike and you have the more open shoulder orientation, and like at this point right here, and ultimately that's going to come from you going early by collapsing your back leg. You can see your hips are a lot more open than Cody, but your shoulders are a lot more open as well. So we want to try to bring all this back. So we want to close the shoulders off, and we're not trying to close the hips off. What we're trying to do is just make the hips drive late so we can keep the shoulder orientation closed. So I always say the number one priority is to have the shoulders as closed as possible at front foot strike, and then the second priority is to get as much power through the hips as possible, but we don't want the hips to go early and compromise the shoulder orientation. That's the problem. So you got to kind of go back to the drawing board, and you got to work on how you're generating the power. When are you timing the hip rotation? And if this leg is collapsing early like this, then everything's going to go early, and that's why your hips get through, but your trunk is already open at that point. And you can see when you're late to power your trunk rotation, you can see the trunk's going to push out a lot better. I think you push your trunk out good. So ultimately, you're going to have a later transfer of energy, which potentially will allow more energy to come up the kinetic chain, kind of like thinking of like the whip. The more delay I can get to the end of the whip, the more energy I can drive through the handle of the whip, through the body of the whip, and it will transfer more energy at the end. You're forcing yours to go early, even though your trunk pushed out. You more than likely didn't get all that energy up from your legs. As you can see, when Cody releases, really everything in the lower half is very quiet, and you can see when you release, you're still very aggressive in the lower half because you didn't really give it that time. You didn't have that delay to really transfer all that kinetic energy. So like I said, go back to the drawing board, really learn where the source of energy comes from, the only leg on the ground, learn how to stabilize it more externally, how to delay the hip rotation, delay the transfer of your weight, and build more energy, and then transfer more energy with that later trunk movement.